I saw in my own son's eyes the same empty gaze my great-grandfather had before he tried to strangle his sister. That's when I knew. My family's nightmare had returned. Good afternoon, my dears. This is Dorothy Williams, 72 years young, speaking to you from my little home in Missoula, Montana, nestled right against the Rocky Mountains. That mountain breeze is such a blessing when the summer heat hits you. No. Today I'm here to share with you a story I've kept buried in my heart for more than 30 years. A story of love, pain, and how fate sometimes sets traps we could never imagine. But before I begin this difficult journey, I'd like to ask a small favor from the heart. Please subscribe to Grandparents' Tales. Hit that like button. It costs nothing, but means everything to me. And tell me in the comments what part of the country you're watching from. I'd love to know your name too. I cherish reading each of your comments. They make me feel less alone in this big house that now holds only me and my memories. I was born in 1953 in a simple but tidy house on the east side of Missoula. My parents, Arthur and Eleanor, were hardworking folks. Dad was a carpenter who made furniture that was truly works of art, with those curves and carvings you hardly see anymore. Mom sewed for clients, making formal dresses mainly. Our house was always filled with colorful fabrics, laces, and ribbons she used in her work. I had a happy childhood playing outside with neighborhood kids, walking to school, hand in hand with my older sister Margaret. Our house wasn't fancy, but we never lacked food on the table or love. And oh, how much love there was in that house. My father, even exhausted from work, always found time to tell bedtime stories. My mother hummed all day while sewing, making the house seem brighter, more alive. The only shadow in our family came from stories about my paternal great-grandfather Nathaniel. He died long before I was born, but stories about him were whispered by adults when they thought children weren't listening. They said he had problems in the head, that sometimes he'd go days without sleeping, talking nonsense, seeing people who weren't there. That once in 1902, he tried to strangle his own sister Amelia because he believed she had been replaced by a serpent demon disguised as a person. What I didn't know then, what my family had deliberately hidden, was that Nathaniel had also killed a neighbor's child during one of his episodes. A 7-year-old boy named Timothy who had wandered into their yard. The family paid money to keep it quiet, shipped Nathaniel off to an asylum where he died 3 years later, forgotten and alone. It runs in the blood, my grandmother would whisper to my mother. Thank God it skipped a generation. Neither my father nor I had it. But genetics, I would learn, is a cruel lottery. Sometimes it skips 2 generations before striking again. I grew up hearing these sanitized stories, like ghost tales, with that shiver down the spine, but knowing it was something from the past that wouldn't affect me. How wrong I was, dear Lord. I finished school at 18 in the early 70s and got a job as a secretary at an accounting firm downtown. It was at that office that I met Philip. Oh my goodness, Philip. Just saying his name, even after so many years, still makes my heart skip a little. He was an accountant, freshly graduated, and moved from Seattle to work in our town. Tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair, and what stood out most, those honey-colored eyes, almost golden in the sunlight. I remember our first meeting like it was yesterday. He walked into the office carrying a stack of folders he could barely balance. I was organizing some documents, and when I looked up, I saw this awkward young man trying not to drop everything on the floor. I rushed to help. Our hands touched for a moment, and that was it. Like lightning, you know, that electric current that runs through your whole body when you meet someone special. Thank you very much, he said, smiling in that way I would later discover was uniquely his. I'm Philip, the new accountant. Dorothy, I replied, feeling my face heat up. Welcome to the firm. We dated for 2 years with all the respect that was expected in those days. Philip was different from other young men I knew. Gentle, attentive, respectful. He never raised his voice, even when we disagreed on something. He had that calm way of resolving things, talking, explaining his point of view. In 1975, he proposed right there in front of my whole family after asking my father's permission. We married 6 months later in a simple ceremony at First Presbyterian Church. We didn't have much money, but our families came together to make a beautiful celebration. When I looked in the mirror that day in my mother's handmade dress, I barely recognized the young woman staring back. She looked like a princess from the stories my father told when I was little. We started our life together in a small but cozy apartment near downtown. I planted geraniums in the windows, sewed colorful curtains, arranged every corner with the greatest care. Philip continued working at the accounting firm, and I started making cakes and sweets to order from home. From the first days of marriage, we talked about having a child. Philip wanted a boy to play ball with, to teach fishing on weekends. I dreamed of a little girl to dress with ribbons to teach family recipes. But deep down, what we really wanted was a healthy child, whether boy or girl. After a year of trying without success, we started to worry. We visited doctors, had tests done. Everything normal, they said. It's just a matter of time and patience. And it did happen. In June 1977, I finally discovered I was pregnant. That evening, I prepared Philip's favorite dinner and placed a small package on the table. Inside were tiny crocheted booties. Philip looked at the booties, then at me, then back at the booties again. Then his eyes widened, filled with tears. "Dorothy, are you—" I nodded, already crying too. "We're having a baby, Philip. I'm 2 months pregnant." He got up so quickly he almost knocked over his chair, came around the table and hugged me tight, lifting me off the ground and spinning me around our small living room. That night, lying in bed, Philip placed his hand on my still, flat stomach and stayed like that in silence. "I'm going to be the best father in the world," he promised, his voice breaking. "I'll teach everything I know. I'll always be present. I'll love this child with all my strength." Charlie was born on a cold January morning in 1978 after almost 12 hours of labor. A chubby baby, rosy-cheeked with a head of black hair that surprised even the doctors. When they placed him in my arms for the first time, I felt a love I didn't know was possible. Philip beside me cried without any shame, his eyes fixed on the small bundle that was our son. "He's perfect," he whispered. "Thank you, my love. Thank you for giving me this gift." Charlie's childhood was like a dream, my dears. From an early age, my son showed unusual intelligence. At just 1 year old, he was already speaking clear words. By 2, he was forming complete sentences that amazed his daycare teachers. "Mrs. Williams, this boy is a prodigy," they'd say. "He talks like a tiny adult." Philip was so proud, he bought a Super 8 camera in 12 painful installments just to record every moment of his son's development. "This boy will go far," he'd say, his eyes shining. "He has his mother's intelligence and his father's determination." When Charlie turned 3 in 1981, we moved to a bigger house in the Pleasant View neighborhood. It had a backyard with a big maple tree, 3 bedrooms, and a small porch where I placed pots of geraniums and ferns. Charlie adapted to preschool like a fish to water. The teachers commented on his ease in learning, his creativity in drawings, his natural leadership among other children. At home, he asked us to read to him every night, not children's stories, but grown-up books, as he called them. At not quite 4 years old, he already recognized all the letters and could put some together into simple words. But there were signs, small things, that should have alerted me. Charlie was an intense boy. When he was interested in something, he dove in head first, almost obsessively. He went through phases of fixation. Dinosaurs, then astronomy, then quantum physics, subjects he studied with unusual depth for his age. And there was an incident at the beach when Charlie was 5. An older boy, maybe 8 or 9, came running and deliberately stepped right in the middle of a sandcastle Charlie was building, destroying everything. I expected Charlie to cry. Instead, he looked at the boy with a strangely calm expression and said in a voice that didn't seem to belong to a child, "You're going to regret that." The older boy laughed. "And what are you going to do, baby cry for mommy?" Charlie continued to stare at him motionless with that fixed gaze that reminded me of the stories about my great-grandfather. Then, without warning, he grabbed a handful of wet sand and threw it directly into the boy's eyes, who fell backward screaming in pain. "Charlie," I exclaimed, running to them. "What did you do?" He turned to me, and his face was again that of my sweet boy, with eyes wide with shock. "He destroyed my castle, Mom," he answered, his voice trembling. I got angry. Later, driving back to the motel, I had a serious talk with Charlie about controlling our impulses. "Even when we're very angry, Charlie, we can't hurt people. Do you understand?" He nodded, seeming genuinely sorry. "I'm sorry, Mom. I don't know what happened. It was like someone else threw the sand." At the time, I thought it was just a child's way of avoiding responsibility. Only years later did I realize there might have been more truth in that statement than I could imagine. Philip's accounting business thrived, and by the time Charlie turned 10 in 1988, we could afford to celebrate in style. We rented the hall at the community center, hired superhero-themed decorations. Charlie was fanatic about Spider-Man. I ordered a 3-tier cake decorated with all the comic book characters he collected. It was an unforgettable party with more than 30 children. Those were the golden years. Charlie stood out more and more at school, always among the top of his class, participating in math olympiads, science fairs, essay contests. By 12, he was already reading complex books, keeping a diary where he wrote surprisingly mature reflections. But he also had a solitary side. Despite being popular at school, he seemed to prefer his own company, spending hours in his room, reading, writing, drawing. "Is this normal?" I asked Philip one night. "Other kids his age are always wanting to go out play in the street." "Our son is special, Dorothy," Philip answered reassuringly. "He has a brilliant mind. It's natural that he's not interested in the same things as other boys." In 1993, when Charlie turned 15, Philip decided to include him more actively in the family business. During school vacations and some Saturdays, Charlie would accompany his father to the office, learning accounting basics. To our surprise and delight, he showed a natural aptitude for numbers, for organization, for the logic of balance sheets. "He has a knack for business, Dorothy," Philip would comment, excited. "When he finishes college, he's going to revolutionize the company." Everything seemed on track, planned, promising until 1995, shortly after Charlie's 17th birthday, when I noticed the first significant changes in his behavior. It started with small things. He who had always been so organized began to leave his room a mess. His sleep, previously so regular, became erratic. Sometimes I would find him awake at 3 in the morning, frantically writing in notebooks that he hid when I entered the room. "I'm just studying, Mom," he would explain with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I have an important test tomorrow." But it was school vacation, and there was no test. His appetite also changed. He was visibly losing weight, his clothes starting to hang loose on his teenage body. The sharpness was new too. Charlie had always been polite, respectful. Now he responded with impatience, was easily irritated, isolated himself more and more. We started receiving calls from the school. Charlie, the exemplary student, was skipping classes. When he did attend, he either seemed lethargic, unable to concentrate, or was too agitated, interrupting teachers with questions or comments out of context. His grades plummeted. "We're concerned," said the school counselor in a tense meeting. "Charles has always been one of our best students. This drastic change in behavior could indicate serious problems." We decided to take him to a doctor. The general practitioner ran tests, blood, urine, even a CT scan. "Everything normal," he assured, "but I strongly recommend a psychological or psychiatric evaluation." The word psychiatric fell like a bomb on our family. I had started to make connections I didn't want to make. The stories about my great-grandfather Nathaniel, Charlie's age, 17 precisely when they said my great-grandfather's problems had begun to manifest. Charlie refused to go to the psychiatrist. On the morning of the appointment, he locked himself in the bathroom and wouldn't come out. You want to lock me up? He shouted through the door. You want to get rid of me like they did with that crazy old man in the family? That chilled my spine. We had never told Charlie about my great-grandfather. How could he know? When we finally convinced him to come out, he was different. Too calm, almost serene, with a strange smile on his lips. All right, he said docilely. Let's go to the doctor. You're right, I'm not well. The sudden change in attitude should have alerted me, but I was so relieved I didn't question it. On the way to the office, sitting in the back seat of the car, Charlie hummed softly a tune I didn't recognize. Looking in the rearview mirror, I noticed his eyes were glazed, fixed on some invisible point, and his lips were moving as if he were talking to someone. It was at that moment, watching my son through the car's rearview mirror, that I saw for the first time what I feared most. The same empty gaze they said my great-grandfather had before he tried to strangle his sister. The consultation with Dr. Morris was both revealing and terrifying. Initially, Charlie seemed cooperative, answering questions with apparent lucidity. But when the doctor began to explore his recent behavioral changes, something shifted. My son started speaking faster, jumping from one subject to another. The numbers talk to me, doctor, he said, his eyes shining with feverish intensity. They have colors and textures. 7 is red and rough like sandpaper. 3 is blue and slippery like soap. The universe is coded in mathematical patterns that only I can see. Then suddenly, he fell silent, staring fixedly at an empty corner of the room. What are you thinking about, Charlie? The doctor asked. He's here, Charlie answered in a low voice. The man in the hat. He's telling me you're not trustworthy. It was as if the floor had opened beneath my feet. My focus was entirely on our son, who now seemed to be animatedly conversing with empty space. Dr. Morris's diagnosis was cautious but direct. Your son presents symptoms suggestive of a disorder in the schizophrenia spectrum. Auditory and visual hallucinations, delusions, disorganized thinking. The age is typical for onset, especially in males. But he's always been so normal, Philip protested, his voice breaking. So intelligent, so balanced. Schizophrenia frequently affects brilliant people, the doctor explained. And the first psychotic episodes are often preceded by a period of normal functioning. It's a treacherous disease precisely because of this. We left that consultation with a prescription for medications and a recommendation to seek more specialized treatment in Seattle. The drive home was silent, heavy. In the back seat, Charlie had returned to mutism, looking out the window with a vacant expression. Following Dr. Morris's recommendation, we traveled to Seattle for a consultation with Dr. Henry Vasconcelos, a renowned psychiatrist. Charlie was surprisingly cooperative that day, maintaining lucid conversation during the 3-hour journey. I'm feeling much better, he assured us before entering the doctor's office. I think these medications really work. The consultation lasted almost 2 hours. Dr. Vasconcelos's approach was warmer than Dr. Morris's, but equally thorough. When the time came for diagnosis, his face assumed a gentle but serious expression. Charles presents a picture quite consistent with paranoid schizophrenia, he explained. The reference delusions, the auditory hallucinations, the affective blunting interspersed with periods of lucidity, everything points to a disorder in the schizophrenic spectrum, probably with significant hereditary component. But he seems so well today, Philip argued. That's a common characteristic of the disease, especially in early stages. There are fluctuations, periods of apparent normality, followed by relapses. The medications help control symptoms, but they don't cure the condition. Will he be able to lead a normal life? I asked. Study work have his own family someday. With proper treatment, many patients achieve a satisfactory quality of life, the doctor replied carefully. But I must be honest, Charles will face significant challenges. Schizophrenia is a chronic condition that will require ongoing medical monitoring. We returned to Missoula with new prescriptions and hope. For a few weeks, it seemed the new medications were working. Charlie returned to school full-time, resumed some normal activities. The side effects, dry mouth, daytime drowsiness, mild tremors, seemed a small price to pay for stability. It was in May, almost 2 months later, that things began to crumble again. I found the pills, dozens of them, hidden inside a hollow book on Charlie's shelf. He hadn't been taking his medication for weeks. I confronted him. "Son, why did you hide the pills? You know you need them to stay well." He looked at me with a coldness I didn't recognize. "They make me slow heavy. I can't think straight when I take them." "But the delusions come back without them, Charlie. The voices, the hallucinations." A strange smile formed on his lips. "And who said they're delusions, Mom? What if I really can see things you can't? What if the man in the hat is real, just invisible to ordinary minds?" The conversation quickly deteriorated. Charlie became agitated, started pacing back and forth, gesturing to the air as if talking to someone only he could see. When I tried to hold him, calm him down, he pushed me with surprising strength, making me fall onto the bed. "Don't touch me!" he shouted, eyes wide with fear and anger. "He says you want to poison me, that the pills are poison." Philip arrived home from work in the middle of this chaos. I had never seen him so frightened, standing in the doorway watching our 17-year-old son in full psychotic episode, shouting delusional accusations against us. We called Dr. Morris, who came immediately. For the first time, he mentioned hospitalization. If he's not taking medication voluntarily and is showing aggressive behavior and intense persecutory delusions, a period of stabilization in a hospital environment may be necessary. The idea of hospitalizing our son broke our hearts, but before we could make any decision, Charlie suddenly seemed to improve. The next morning, he came down for breakfast, calm, almost serene. He apologized for his behavior, promised to start taking his medications regularly again. "It was just a lapse, Mom," he explained, obediently taking the pill I placed beside his glass of juice. "It won't happen again." For a few days, I supervised each dose of medication, verifying that he actually swallowed it. Charlie returned to his routine. School home, sometimes trips to his father's office on weekends. He seemed stable, almost normal. It was precisely when we lowered our guard that the worst happened. On a Friday in June, Charlie didn't return from school at the usual time. By 5 in the afternoon, I started to worry. By 6, I was in panic. I called all his friends, the school, even the police station. No one had news of him. Philip went out looking, checking all the places our son used to frequent. When he returned around 9 at night, his face was pale, his eyes red. "Let's go to the police," he decided. "This isn't normal. Something happened." We were preparing to leave when we heard keys in the door. Charlie entered, his hair disheveled, clothes dirty, and wrinkled, a strong smell of alcohol emanating from him. But what terrified me most was his expression, completely vacant, as if he were sleepwalking. "Well, where were you?" Philip demanded, his voice trembling between relief and anger. Charlie looked at us as if seeing strangers. Then, without warning, his face contorted with rage. "You're not my parents," he said, his voice low and menacing. "The man in the hat showed me the truth. My real parents would never try to poison me with those pills." What happened next was the most terrifying night of my life. Charlie, in full capgras delusion, believing we were imposters replacing his real parents, became violent. He grabbed a lamp from the side table and hurled it against the wall, shattering it. Then he lunged at Philip. My husband, caught off guard, stumbled backward as Charlie's hands closed around his throat. "Where are my real parents?" Charlie screamed, spittle flying from his mouth. "What did you do with them?" Philip, gasping for air, managed to break free and push Charlie away. Our son crashed into the coffee table, sending books and magazines flying. But he got up immediately, his movements eerily fluid, like a predator stalking its prey. "Ah, Charlie, please," I pleaded, backing toward the phone. "It's us. It's Mom and Dad. You're sick, sweetheart. Let us help you." Liars. He roared, and the sound that came from his throat didn't seem human. The man in the hat told me everything. He showed me your true faces, demons wearing the masks of my parents. He reached for a kitchen knife that had been left on the counter from dinner preparation. The blade gleamed under the overhead light as he raised it, his honey-colored eyes, so much like his father's, now reflecting nothing but madness and terror. Time slowed to a crawl. I could hear my own heartbeat thundering in my ears, could feel sweat beating on my forehead despite the cool evening air. Philip's breathing was rapid and shallow, his face pale as paper. "Charlie," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "Please, son, look at me. Really look at me. I'm your mother. I sang you lullabies when you were scared. I made your favorite chocolate chip cookies every Sunday. Remember? Please remember." For a moment, just a moment, something flickered in his eyes. A shadow of recognition of the sweet boy I'd raised. His hand holding the knife trembled slightly, but then the moment passed. "Nice try, demon," he hissed. "But the man in the hat warned me you'd try to use false memories to trick me." He stepped toward me, the knife raised. I closed my eyes, certain I was about to die at the hands of my own child. Then I heard Philip's voice, steady and calm, despite the terror of the situation. "Charlie, if we're not your real parents, then where are they? Ask the man in the hat where they are." Charlie paused, tilting his head as if listening to a voice only he could hear. His face scrunched in concentration, then confusion. He says they're... Charlie shook his head violently. "No, that's not right. They wouldn't. They would never abandon me." The knife clattered to the floor as Charlie collapsed, his hands clutching his head. "Make it stop," he sobbed. "Please, make the voices stop. I can't tell what's real anymore." We called 911. The paramedics arrived within minutes, followed by police officers who looked barely older than Charlie himself. They had to sedate him when he became violent again, convinced the paramedics were there to harvest his organs for the demons wearing his parents' faces. As they loaded my son into the ambulance, strapped to a gurney and heavily sedated, I caught a glimpse of his face. Even unconscious, it was twisted with anguish and fear. This wasn't my Charlie anymore. This was a stranger wearing my son's face, trapped in a nightmare of his own mind's making. The drive to Western State Hospital in Seattle was the longest 3 hours of my life. Philip and I barely spoke, each lost in our own thoughts, our own grief. We had lost our son that night, not to death, but to something arguably worse. The brilliant, loving boy we'd raised was gone, replaced by this frightened, violent stranger. Charlie was admitted to the acute psychiatric ward, where he would remain for the next 6 months. The first weeks were the hardest. He was heavily medicated, barely conscious most of the time. When he was awake, he either didn't recognize us or became agitated when we visited, convinced we were still the demons from his delusions. Dr. Sarah Chen, his psychiatrist at the hospital, was a petite woman with kind eyes and an infinite well of patience. "This is going to be a long process," she warned us during one of our weekly meetings. Charlie's psychotic break was severe. It may take months before we find the right combination of medications, and even then full recovery isn't guaranteed. "But he will get better, won't he?" Philip asked, his voice hoarse from sleepless nights and constant worry. Dr. Chen's pause before answering told us everything we needed to know. "We're going to do everything we can," she said finally. "But you need to prepare yourselves for the possibility that the Charlie you knew before may never fully return." Philip's business in Missoula was suffering from his absence. Clients were growing impatient, deadlines were being missed. His partner George was doing his best, but it wasn't sustainable long term. We made the difficult decision to temporarily relocate to Seattle to be closer to Charlie and hopefully salvage what we could of our old life. Philip rented a small apartment near the hospital, and opened a satellite office of Frontier Accounting. I found work as a receptionist at a medical clinic. It wasn't much, but it helped pay for the expensive psychiatric care not covered by insurance. Gradually, very gradually, Charlie began to improve. The medications, a complex cocktail that had to be adjusted weekly, started to clear the fog of psychosis. The man in the hat, his most persistent hallucination, became less frequent and less commanding. Charlie began to recognize us again, though he was often confused about where he was and why. "I had the strangest dreams, Mom," he said during one visit, his voice slurred from medication. "I dreamed you and Dad were monsters trying to hurt me. But that's silly, isn't it? You would never hurt me." My heart broke a little more each time he said things like that so casually, dismissing the terror that had nearly destroyed our family. To him, it had just been a bad dream. To us, it had been a living nightmare that changed everything. After 6 months, the doctors felt Charlie was stable enough for outpatient treatment. He moved into a halfway house for young adults with mental illness, a converted Victorian mansion with round-the-clock supervision and structured activities. It wasn't home, but it was progress. We settled into a new routine. Philip worked during the day, slowly rebuilding his client base in Seattle. I visited Charlie every afternoon, bringing him homemade cookies or magazines about his latest obsession. Astronomy had returned as his fixation, replacing the more dangerous delusions. Evenings were for Philip and me trying to process what had happened to our family and figure out how to move forward. The Charlie who emerged from treatment was different from the boy we'd lost. Quieter, more fragile, prone to anxiety and sudden mood swings. The medications that kept the psychosis at bay also dulled his brilliant mind. The boy who had once devoured quantum physics textbooks now struggled to follow the plot of simple television shows. But he was ours again, and that meant everything. The first time he laughed, really laughed, not the hollow echo that had replaced his joy for so long, was during a visit to the Seattle Center. We were watching street performers, and a clown made an elaborate show of trying to juggle increasingly ridiculous objects. Charlie burst into giggles, the sound so pure and genuine that Philip and I both started crying right there in the crowd. "What's wrong?" Charlie asked, concerned by our tears. "Nothing, sweetheart," I managed. "Nothing at all. We're just happy to hear you laugh." For nearly 2 years, this became our life. Charlie lived in supervised housing, attended therapy sessions, and support groups, took his medications religiously. Philip and I worked to rebuild not just our business, but our marriage, which had been strained nearly to breaking by the trauma we'd endured. There were setbacks. Charlie would sometimes stop taking his medication, convinced he was cured and didn't need it anymore. The symptoms would return within days. The paranoia, the hallucinations, the frightening disconnection from reality. Each relapse was a reminder of how fragile his stability really was. But there were also victories. Small ones but precious. Charlie, completing a GED program, making a friend at the halfway house, showing interest in painting during art therapy sessions. We learned to celebrate these moments without taking them for granted. It was during one of these relatively stable periods that Charlie met Emma, a young woman in his support group who was recovering from her own battle with mental illness. She had bipolar disorder and understood the daily struggle of living with a brain that sometimes betrayed you. They formed a tentative friendship that slowly grew into something deeper. Philip was initially concerned. "Is it wise for 2 people with mental illness to be in a relationship?" he asked Dr. Chen during one of our family therapy sessions. "Mental illness doesn't disqualify someone from love," Dr. Chen replied gently. "In fact, having a partner who truly understands the challenges can be incredibly beneficial. We'll monitor the situation, of course, but I think Emma has been a positive influence on Charlie's recovery." She was right. Charlie seemed more motivated to stay on his medication when Emma was around. He wanted to be stable, for her to be the best version of himself. They spent hours together, talking about books, playing board games, taking walks through Seattle's parks under the watchful eye of their counselors. For the first time since his diagnosis, I dared to hope that Charlie might have something approaching a normal life. Maybe he couldn't attend college or pursue the career in accounting we'd once envisioned, but he could still find happiness, love, purpose. Then, on a cold November night in 1997, our world shattered again. Philip had returned to Missoula for a few days to handle some business matters that required his personal attention. A major client was threatening to leave unless certain issues were resolved in person. He'd made the trip reluctantly worried about leaving Charlie and me, but George had been insistent. "It's just for 3 days," Dorothy Philip assured me as he packed his suitcase. "I'll handle Morrison's account check on the office and be back by Friday." He called that evening to let me know he'd arrived safely and was meeting with the client first thing in the morning. "Tell Charlie I said goodnight," he said, "and that I love him." "I will. I love you too, Philip. Drive carefully." Those were the last words I ever spoke to my husband. The call came at 4:27 a.m. I knew before I answered that something terrible had happened. No one calls at that hour with good news. George's voice was thick with tears and shock. "Hey, Dorothy, I don't know how to tell you this. Philip, there was an incident at Sullivan's Tavern. He tried to help a waitress who was being harassed by a drunk customer. The man had a knife." The rest of his words came through a fog. Stabbed in the abdomen, ambulance, hospital, surgery, complications. I kept waiting for him to say Philip was okay, that he was injured but alive, but those words never came. "He didn't make it, Dorothy. Philip's gone." I don't remember hanging up the phone or getting dressed or driving to the halfway house where Charlie lived. I don't remember the conversation with the night supervisor or walking down the narrow hallway to Charlie's room. I only remember standing in his doorway, watching my son sleep peacefully, knowing I was about to destroy whatever fragile stability he'd managed to achieve. Charlie woke up when I touched his shoulder. He smiled at first, happy to see me, then noticed my tears and red-rimmed eyes. "Mom." "What's wrong? Are you sick?" I sat on the edge of his narrow bed, searching for words that didn't exist. How do you tell your mentally ill child that his father has been murdered? How do you shatter someone who's already so broken? To Charlie, I began, my voice trembling like a leaf in the wind. "Something has happened. Your father. There was a fight in a bar in Missoula. A man attacked him with a knife. The doctors tried everything they could, but..." I couldn't finish the sentence. I didn't need to. Charlie's face went completely blank, his eyes focusing on something I couldn't see. "The man in the hat told me this would happen," he said in a voice so calm it terrified me. "He warned me yesterday. He said Dad would leave us, that it would be just the two of us, that it was better this way." "Charlie, no," I said desperately. "The man in the hat isn't real. He's a hallucination. Your father's death has nothing to do with..." "He warned me." Charlie repeated, his gaze fixed on the empty corner of the room. "The man in the hat said Dad would leave us, and now he has. He's never wrong, Mom. Never." That was the beginning of Charlie's worst relapse yet. The news of Philip's death, combined with the guilt and confusion of believing his hallucination had predicted it, sent him spiraling into a psychotic episode that lasted for months. He became convinced that the man in the hat had somehow caused Philip's death, that the hallucination wasn't just a symptom of his illness, but a real entity with supernatural power. He spent hours having animated conversations with this invisible presence, alternately pleading with it and arguing with it. The staff at the halfway house couldn't handle his deteriorating condition. Charlie had to be readmitted to the hospital's acute psychiatric ward, where he was placed on a 72-hour hold that stretched into weeks, then months. I was alone, truly alone, for the first time in my adult life. Philip was dead, murdered by a stranger in a bar fight that had nothing to do with our family, but everything to do with his character, his inability to stand by when someone was being hurt. Charlie was locked in a psychiatric ward, lost in a maze of delusions and grief. I had to plan Philip's funeral by myself, handle his business affairs, deal with insurance companies and lawyers, and the police investigation. George helped as much as he could, but ultimately the burden fell on me. The funeral was small, just family, a few close friends, some clients who had genuinely cared about Philip. Charlie couldn't attend. He was too unstable, too lost in his psychotic break, to handle the reality of his father's death. I sat in the front pew of First Presbyterian Church, the same church where Philip and I had married 22 years earlier, and felt more alone than I had ever thought possible. After the funeral, after the last casserole had been delivered by well-meaning neighbors, after the sympathy cards stopped coming, I was left with the silence of our small apartment and the crushing weight of grief and responsibility. Charlie's condition didn't improve. If anything, it got worse. Dr. Chen had to adjust his medications, constantly trying to find something that would break through the wall of psychosis that had built up around him. Nothing seemed to work. "I'm afraid Charlie may need long-term residential care," she finally told me during one of our sessions. "His psychotic symptoms are treatment-resistant, and the trauma of losing his father has created additional complications. There's a facility called New Horizons about an hour north of the city. It's specifically designed for young adults with severe mental illness." The thought of placing Charlie in what was essentially a mental institution broke my heart, but I had no choice. I couldn't care for him myself. He required round-the-clock supervision and professional medical care, and I had to work to support myself. Philip's life insurance would help, but it wouldn't last forever. New Horizons was not what I'd expected. Instead of the grim institutional setting, I'd imagined it was a cluster of modern buildings set on beautifully landscaped grounds. The staff were young, enthusiastic professionals who specialized in working with people like Charlie. There were art studios, a library, gardens where residents could grow their own vegetables. "We focus on recovery and integration," explained Dr. Marcus Webb, the facility's director. "Many of our residents are able to transition to independent living with proper support and treatment." Charlie moved to New Horizons in May 1998, almost exactly 1 year after Philip's death. He seemed to adapt reasonably well to the structure and routine. The man in the hat was still a persistent presence, but the new environment and adjusted medications made him less commanding, less frightening. I found a small apartment nearby and visited every day. Charlie and I would walk through the gardens or sit in the common area playing board games or just talking. Slowly, gradually, he began to process his grief over Philip's death in a healthier way. "I miss him, Mom," he said one afternoon as we sat by the facility's small pond, watching the ducks paddle around in lazy circles. "I know the man in the hat didn't really cause Dad's death. Dr. Webb explained that sometimes our minds try to make sense of terrible things by creating false connections." It was the first time since Philip's murder that Charlie had acknowledged his hallucination as a symptom rather than reality. I felt a flutter of hope in my chest. "I miss him too, sweetheart," I said, taking Charlie's hand. "Every single day. But your father loved you so much, and he would want you to get better and live a good life." Charlie squeezed my hand gently. "I'm going to try, Mom. I'm really going to try." The next few years brought slow but steady progress. Charlie's medications were finally stabilized on a combination that controlled his psychotic symptoms without completely dulling his personality. He participated in group therapy, individual counseling, and various programs designed to help residents develop life skills. But the most significant development was Charlie's discovery of art. During a painting class led by a local artist volunteer, Charlie found he had a natural talent for expressing his complex inner world through color and form. His paintings were unlike anything I'd ever seen. Abstract, but emotionally powerful, full of swirling colors and shapes that seemed to capture the chaos and beauty of a mind touched by madness. "Art helps me make sense of things," Charlie explained as he showed me his latest canvas. A stunning piece that seemed to depict a storm clearing to reveal a brilliant sunset. "When I paint, the voices quiet down. It's like meditation, but better." His art therapist, Maria Santos, was amazed by Charlie's rapid progress. "I've worked with hundreds of clients over the years," she told me during a family meeting. "Charlie has something special. His work isn't just therapeutic, it's genuinely artistic. With the right support, he could potentially make a living as an artist." The idea seemed impossible at first. Charlie was still living in a residential facility, still dependent on medication and supervision. But Maria's encouragement planted a seed of possibility that began to grow. In 2003, 5 years after Philip's death, Charlie's first art exhibition was held at New Horizons. It was a small event, just residents, staff families, and a few local art enthusiasts. But it marked a major milestone in his recovery. Seeing Charlie stand next to his paintings, calmly discussing his work with visitors, I felt Philip's presence so strongly it took my breath away. "He would be so proud," I whispered to Charlie during a quiet moment. "I know, Mom." Charlie replied, his eyes bright with an emotion I hadn't seen since before his illness began. I can feel him here with us. The exhibition was successful enough that Maria began exploring opportunities for Charlie to show his work in local galleries. It was a long shot. The art world could be challenging even for artists without mental health issues. But Charlie's unique perspective and undeniable talent began to attract attention. In 2005, a small gallery in Seattle's Capitol Hill neighborhood agreed to include 3 of Charlie's paintings in a group exhibition featuring outsider artists, creators who worked outside the mainstream art world. It was Charlie's first real exhibition, and I was more nervous than he was. What if no one likes them? I worried as we drove to the opening. "Then they don't like them," Charlie said with a shrug. "But I like them, and they helped me heal. That's enough." The exhibition was a revelation. Charlie's paintings drew crowds of viewers who stood in front of them for long minutes, absorbed in their emotional intensity. 2 of the 3 pieces sold that evening, and several people asked about commissioning work from this mysterious new artist. "I think we may have discovered something special," the gallery owner Janet Morrison told me as the evening wound down. "Charlie's work has a raw honesty that's very rare. People respond to that authenticity." That exhibition marked the beginning of a new chapter in Charlie's life. He was able to transition from the residential facility to a supervised apartment program, living independently, but with regular check-ins from mental health professionals. His art became both his passion and his livelihood. Not enough to make him wealthy, but sufficient to give him purpose and a measure of financial independence. The years that followed weren't easy. Charlie's illness never went away completely. He still had bad days when the man in the hat returned with his whispered warnings and impossible demands. He still needed medication to function, still required regular therapy sessions and medical monitoring. But he also had something many people take for granted: a reason to get up in the morning. His art gave him a way to transform his pain into something beautiful, something that could touch other people's lives. In 2008, when I was 55 years old, I had an accident that changed the dynamic of our relationship once again. I slipped on a wet bathroom rug and broke my hip, requiring surgery and months of physical therapy. For the first time since Charlie's childhood, he became the caregiver instead of the one being cared for. Initially, I worried the stress of caring for me would trigger a relapse. Charlie was living in his supervised apartment stable, but still fragile. The responsibility of helping his injured mother seemed like too much to ask. But Charlie surprised me. He moved back into my apartment, temporarily helping me with daily tasks, driving me to medical appointments, even doing the grocery shopping and cooking. He was patient, attentive, and remarkably capable. "Mom, you've taken care of me my whole life," he said when I tried to protest his help. "Let me take care of you for a while." There were moments of stress when the situation became overwhelming for him. A few times, I woke in the night to find him sitting in the living room, having an animated conversation with his invisible companion. But he never let it interfere with my care, and he always sought help from his support team when he needed it. During my recovery, we hired a part-time nurse named Elena Rodriguez to help with my physical therapy and medication management. Elena was a remarkable woman. a psychiatric nurse who had worked with mentally ill patients for over 20 years. She understood Charlie's condition and treated him with the same respect and dignity she showed any other family member. "Your son is one of the strongest people I've ever met," Elena told me one afternoon as we watched Charlie work on a painting in the corner of the living room. "What he's overcome, what he's achieved despite his illness, it's extraordinary." Elena's presence in our lives became a blessing in ways I hadn't expected. She connected Charlie with other resources, support groups for artists with mental illness programs that helped disabled individuals market their work, even opportunities to speak at conferences about the intersection of creativity and mental health. "I think Charlie has found his calling," Elena observed. "Not just as an artist, but as an advocate. His story could help so many other families." By 2010, Charlie was well enough established as an artist to move into his own apartment, a real apartment, not supervised housing. It was a modest one-bedroom place near downtown Seattle, with good natural light for painting and close enough to my home that we could see each other regularly. The man in the hat still visited occasionally, especially during periods of stress or change. But Charlie had learned to manage these episodes better. He had coping strategies, a strong support network, and most importantly, a sense of purpose that helped him fight back against the darker aspects of his illness. "The voices used to control me," he explained during one of his occasional speaking engagements at mental health conferences. "Now I control them. They're still there sometimes, but they don't get to make my decisions anymore." One evening in 2012, as we sat in Charlie's apartment, looking through a catalog for his upcoming solo exhibition, he turned to me with a serious expression. "Mom, I need to tell you something," he said. "I've been thinking a lot about Dad lately, about the night he died." My heart clenched. We rarely talked about Philip's murder anymore. It was still too painful, even after all these years. "What about that night, sweetheart? I blamed myself for a long time," Charlie continued. "The man in the hat made me believe I somehow caused it by not being a better son by being sick. But Dr. Webb helped me understand that Dad's death wasn't my fault. It wasn't anyone's fault except the man who killed him." That's right," I said softly. "Your father died because he was a good man who tried to help someone in trouble. It had nothing to do with you." Charlie nodded slowly. "I know that now, and I think Dad would be proud of who I've become. Despite everything that happened, despite the illness, I've found a way to build something meaningful with my life." "He would be incredibly proud," I assured him, tears sliding down my cheeks. "We both would be." That conversation marked another turning point in Charlie's recovery. The guilt and self-blame that had plagued him for years finally began to lift, replaced by a quiet confidence in his own worth and potential. His solo exhibition opened 3 months later at a respected gallery in Pioneer Square. The show was titled Conversations with Shadows, Charlie's way of acknowledging his ongoing relationship with the symptoms of his illness, while also celebrating his ability to transform those experiences into art. The opening night was everything we could have hoped for. The gallery was packed with collectors, critics, and art lovers. Charlie moved through the crowd with confidence, discussing his work with intelligence and insight. Several pieces sold, and the reviews in local art magazines were uniformly positive. "Charles Williams has created a body of work that is both deeply personal and universally resonant," wrote one critic. "His paintings offer a window into the experience of mental illness that is neither romanticized nor sensationalized, but honest and ultimately hopeful." Standing in that gallery, watching my son, now 34 years old, explain his artistic process to an attentive crowd, I felt Philip's presence more strongly than I had since the night he died. This was what he would have wanted for Charlie, not the traditional success we'd once envisioned, but something even more precious. The ability to take his greatest challenges and transform them into his greatest strengths. But life, as I've learned repeatedly, has a way of testing us just when we think we've found our footing. In early 2013, Charlie began experiencing some troubling symptoms that weren't entirely related to his schizophrenia. He was having difficulty concentrating, problems with coordination, and occasional episodes of confusion that didn't match his usual psychiatric symptoms. After extensive testing, doctors discovered that Charlie had developed a rare neurological condition called tardive dyskinesia, a side effect of the long-term use of antipsychotic medications. The irony was cruel. The drugs that had saved his sanity were now affecting his nervous system. "We can try switching to newer medications," Dr. Chen explained during a family meeting. But after so many years of stability on his current regimen, any change carries risks. Charlie could experience a recurrence of psychotic symptoms. It was an impossible choice: accept the progressive neurological damage or risk the return of the devastating mental illness that had nearly destroyed him. Charlie, however, was surprisingly calm about the decision. "I want to try the new medications," he said firmly. "I can't paint if my hands don't work properly. And painting is what keeps me sane now more than any pill ever could." The medication transition was terrifying. For weeks, we all held our breath watching for signs that Charlie's psychotic symptoms were returning. There were a few rough days when the man in the hat made brief appearances, but Charlie's coping skills and strong support network helped him weather the storm. The new medications controlled his schizophrenia symptoms while gradually improving his neurological function. More importantly, they seemed to have fewer side effects overall. Charlie's thinking became clearer, his energy increased, and his artistic output exploded. "I feel more like myself than I have in years," he told me during one of our weekly dinners together. "It's like someone turned up the volume on my life." That renewed vitality led to another unexpected development romance. Charlie met Sarah, a librarian and amateur photographer, at a coffee shop near his apartment. She was attracted to his paintings, which he'd been working on at a corner table, and struck up a conversation about art and creativity. Sarah knew about Charlie's mental illness from early in their relationship. He'd learned to be upfront about his condition to avoid more painful revelations later. To my amazement and relief, she wasn't deterred. "Mental illness is just one part of who Charlie is," she explained to me during their first family dinner together. "He's also kind, talented, funny, and one of the most genuine people I've ever met. Why would I let a medical condition overshadow all those wonderful qualities?" Their relationship developed slowly and carefully, with input from Charlie's treatment team and my cautious blessing. Sarah attended family therapy sessions, learned about Charlie's warning signs and triggers, and became an integral part of his support network. In 2015, they moved in together. Another milestone that would have seemed impossible during the darkest days of Charlie's illness. They created a life that accommodated both of their needs: Sarah's love of books and photography, Charlie's need for routine and creative space, and their shared appreciation for quiet evenings and long conversations. "I never thought I'd have this," Charlie confided to me one evening as we watched Sarah hang her photographs next to his paintings in their shared apartment. "A partner who understands me, a home we've built together, work that matters to me. For so long, I thought mental illness meant I'd never have a normal life." "This is better than normal," I replied. "This is real." Today, as I record this story for you, my dears, Charlie is 47 years old. He still lives with schizophrenia. That hasn't changed and never will. He still takes medication daily, still sees his psychiatrist regularly, still has occasional rough patches when stress or fatigue makes his symptoms more pronounced. But he also has a life rich with meaning and connection. His artwork is now shown in galleries across the Pacific Northwest, and he's been featured in several national publications about mental health and recovery. He and Sarah have been together for over 8 years now, and their relationship continues to be a source of strength and joy for both of them. More importantly, Charlie has found ways to use his experience with mental illness to help others. He speaks regularly at conferences and support groups, sharing his story with families who are just beginning their own journeys with serious mental illness. His message is always the same: recovery is possible, but it doesn't mean returning to who you were before. It means becoming someone new, someone stronger, someone who has learned to work with their illness rather than be defined by it. Last month, Charlie called me with exciting news. He'd been commissioned to create a series of paintings for the lobby of a new psychiatric facility being built in Tacoma. The irony wasn't lost on either of us. The same young man who had once been forcibly committed to a psychiatric hospital was now being paid to create art that would welcome and inspire other patients beginning their own recovery journeys. "I think Dad would get a kick out of this," Charlie said, his voice warm with amusement and pride. His son, the crazy artist, getting paid to decorate a mental hospital. "Your father would be over the moon," I assured him. "He always knew you were destined for something special, even when we couldn't imagine what that might look like." As for me, I'm now 72 years old, and I've learned things about love, loss, and resilience that I never wanted to learn but am grateful to know. I've discovered that families can survive almost anything if they hold on to each other and refuse to give up hope. I've learned that mental illness is not a moral failing or a character weakness, but a medical condition that can be managed with proper treatment and support. Most importantly, I've learned that our greatest tragedies can sometimes become our greatest strengths. Charlie's illness took away the future we'd planned for him, but it gave him something else: a unique perspective on the human condition, an ability to create art that speaks to people's deepest experiences of pain and healing, and a calling to help others who are walking similar paths. The man in the hat still visits occasionally, but he's no longer the terrifying presence he once was. Charlie has learned to acknowledge him without being controlled by him. "He's part of my landscape now," Charlie explains, "like living near a volcano, potentially dangerous but manageable if you respect it and stay prepared." Philip's murder remains an open wound in our family's history. The man who killed him served only 8 years in prison before being released on parole. Sometimes I think about calling the parole office or looking him up online, but I've decided that path leads nowhere good. Philip is gone, and no amount of anger or desire for additional justice will bring him back. My energy is better spent supporting Charlie and building whatever life we have left together. There's something I haven't told you yet, something I discovered only recently while going through old family documents. Remember how I said Charlie somehow knew about my great-grandfather Nathaniel, even though we'd never told him those stories? I found the answer in a box of my grandmother's papers that had been stored in my sister's attic for decades. It turns out there were more family stories about Nathaniel than I'd ever known. Not just the attempted strangulation of his sister, but a detailed account of his final psychotic break, written by a family friend who had witnessed it. The description was chilling in its similarity to Charlie's own episodes: the same vacant stare, the same delusional beliefs about family members being replaced by imposters, even the same hallucination of a man in dark clothing giving him commands. The friend's account also mentioned that Nathaniel, during his lucid moments in the asylum, had shown remarkable artistic ability. He created intricate drawings on any scrap of paper. He could find images that the staff described as beautiful, but deeply disturbing, as if he could see into realms hidden from normal sight. I showed these documents to Charlie, who studied them with fascination rather than fear. "It's like a genetic echo," he mused. "The same illness, the same symptoms, even the same creative impulse, but with one crucial difference." "What's that?" Nathaniel lived in an era when mental illness was seen as demonic possession or moral weakness. He died alone and forgotten, his art thrown away as the ravings of a madman. I live in a time when we understand these conditions as medical issues that can be treated. My art isn't dismissed, it's celebrated. That makes all the difference. He's right, of course. The same genes that doomed my great-grandfather to a life of tragedy and isolation have given Charlie a unique gift. The difference is the century he was born in, the family who refused to give up on him, and the medical advances that made recovery possible. I've been sharing this story with you, not just to purge my own memories, but to offer hope to other families facing similar challenges. If you're watching this because someone you love has been diagnosed with schizophrenia or another serious mental illness, please know that your story doesn't have to end in tragedy. It won't be easy. There will be dark days when you wonder if things will ever get better. There will be moments when you're scared of your own child, when you question every decision you've made, when you feel completely alone in your struggle. But there will also be unexpected moments of joy, small victories that mean everything, and the gradual realization that love really can conquer almost anything. Your loved one may never become the person you originally envisioned, but they can still become someone wonderful. Someone who has learned to transform their greatest challenges into their greatest strengths. Mental illness doesn't have to be the end of the story. It can be the beginning of a different story, one that's deeper and more meaningful than anything you originally planned. Thank you for listening to my story, my dears. Thank you for letting an old woman share her memories and her hard-won wisdom. If this story has touched you in any way, please leave a comment below. Share your own experiences if you feel comfortable doing so. Let's build a community of support for families who are walking this difficult but ultimately hopeful path. And please don't forget to like this video and subscribe to Grandparents' Tales. Your support means the world to me and helps me continue sharing these important stories. Until next time, remember, love is stronger than illness, hope is more powerful than fear, and every family has the potential for healing no matter how broken they may seem. This is Dorothy Williams signing off from Missoula, Montana, where the mountain breeze still brings me comfort, and the memories of my beautiful, complicated family keep me company every single day.